My wife abandoned me in rehab and took my 3 kids with her 2 8-year-old lover. Years later, she comes back begging. But I built an empire, and my kids chose me. I'm 42 years old. I work in the event business. I'll get to that. And I need to tell this story because I basically went from having everything to losing everything, and then rebuilding something better than I ever imagined. I guess I should start with the day everything went to hell, literally, when I fell 2 stories from a faulty scaffold at a construction site in Illinois. I was a site supervisor, had been doing that for like 15 years, and that day I was checking the work on the second floor when the damn scaffold just gave out under my feet. I don't remember the impact, honestly, but I do remember waking up in the hospital with back pain that I'd never felt in my life. Like someone had split me in two with an axe and then tried to tape me back together. My wife Kristen was there when I opened my eyes, and I remember thinking, okay, she's here. Everything's gonna be all right. She was like 38 at the time. I had just turned 38 too. We'd been married 14 years and had 3 kids. Leah, who was 12, Gabriel, who was 11, and Harper, who was 7. I thought my family was going to be my anchor while I recovered. Spoiler alert, I was very wrong. The doctor told me I had severe spinal injuries, that I was lucky not to be paralyzed, but that I'd probably never walk properly again. He said probably never. Like he was talking about the weather, super casual, and there I was lying there thinking, what do you mean probably never? I have 3 kids, a job that requires being on my feet all day, a life. But well, turns out when you fall from a second story because your company is too cheap to maintain equipment properly, your life changes in ways you can't imagine. I spent like 3 months between the hospital and the rehab facility. At first, Kristen came every day. Brought the kids on weekends. Normal. But after the first few weeks, I started noticing she was arriving later, leaving earlier, always had some excuse. The kids stopped coming as much. Leah would ask me on the phone how I was doing. Gabriel would tell me about his soccer games. Harper would send me little drawings she made. But seeing them in person became increasingly rare. And Kristen started acting different in ways I couldn't pinpoint, but that were definitely there. The thing is, when you're lying in a hospital bed fighting to be able to move without screaming in pain, you start noticing things, like how your wife doesn't look you in the eyes anymore. Like how she's always checking her phone and smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. Like how suddenly she has plans all the time and can't stay more than half an hour during visits. I tried telling myself I was being paranoid, that it was stress, that she was also having a hard time taking care of the kids alone. But deep down, I knew something was happening. I just didn't want to admit it because what was I going to do about it? I couldn't even get up to go to the bathroom by myself. And then came the day, like 2 months after the accident, I was at the rehab center, trying to take 3 steps with a walker, which is way harder than it sounds, by the way, when a person I'd never seen in my life walked into my room and handed me some papers. Divorce papers. Kristen was serving me divorce papers while I was in rehab, trying to learn to walk again. Can you believe it? She didn't even have the guts to tell me in person. She sent a process server to give me the papers like it was any normal legal procedure. I called Kristen immediately, obviously, and she told me very calmly that she couldn't deal with this anymore, that she needed to move on with her life, that the kids needed stability, and I couldn't provide that anymore. I yelled at her. I'm not gonna lie. I yelled at her about how she could do this to me now. What kind of person abandons her husband when he needs her most? She just said she'd already made her decision and hung up. Just like that, like it was nothing. And there I was, holding the phone, unable to process what had just happened. What I didn't know at the time, and what I'd find out later, was that Kristen had been seeing a guy named Shane for like a month, a 8-year-old personal trainer 10 years younger than her, who she met at the gym she'd started going to manage the stress. Apparently, while I was fighting for my life, she was at the gym hooking up with the spin instructor or whatever. The irony isn't lost on me. Like, I fall from a scaffold and lose my mobility, and she runs off with a guy whose literal job is to be athletic and fit. So the divorce proceeded fast. Too fast. I was in the rehab facility, had no job, no income, could barely walk with a cane, and my lawyer basically told me I didn't have many options. Kristen kept the house, which she was going to lose anyway because my salary was what paid the mortgage, full custody of the kids, and I was left with visitation rights that would be determined once my situation stabilized. On paper, it sounded reasonable, but what it really meant was that she had total control over whether I saw my kids or not. And then came the final blow. Like a month after the divorce, Kristen called me, the first time she'd spoken to me since she served the papers, to tell me she was moving, out of state, with Shane, and with my kids, to another state. Basically taking the only thing that mattered to me in the world to a place where I couldn't easily reach. I told her she couldn't do that it violated the custody agreement, and she very calmly explained that technically she could because I didn't have legal custody established yet, just pending visitation rights. She'd played me legally, and I hadn't even realized it until it was too late. They left in October, I think, or maybe November. I don't remember exactly. By then, I'd already gotten out of the rehab center and was living with my older brother, Andrew. Andrew's an electrician. He's like 45 years old, lives alone in a small but decent house, and he basically saved my life when I had nowhere to go. He set me up in his guest room and let me stay there without charging me anything while I tried to get back on my feet, literally and figuratively. The first months living with Andrew were, I don't know, surreal. I went from doing physical therapy 3 times a week. I still limped quite a bit and needed the cane for long distances, to trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do with my life. I couldn't go back to construction. That was clear. My body just couldn't handle heavy physical work. I'd hired a lawyer, Philip was his name, to sue the construction company for negligence, but that was going to take years to process. And I tried to contact my kids. God knows I tried. I called, sent text messages, sent letters, packages, birthday gifts, everything. Kristen never answered my calls. The messages never got responses. The packages. I don't know what happened with the packages. She probably threw them away or Shane kept them. It was like screaming into the void. I knew my kids were out there, somewhere, living their lives, but I was like a ghost to them. A father who had simply disappeared. Andrew told me to keep trying, not to give up, but he also told me I needed to focus on my own recovery first. He said, "You can't be a good father if you're destroyed. You have to rebuild yourself first." And he was right, I guess. But at the time, it made me angry when he said that. Like, how am I going to focus on myself when my kids are growing up without me? But eventually I understood what he meant. The thing is, Andrew also gave me tough love when I needed it. One day, like 6 months after Kristen left, I was lying on the couch feeling miserable. Probably drunk. He drank quite a bit in those days. I'm not going to lie. And Andrew came home from work, saw me there, and literally threw a glass of cold water in my face. He said, "Get up, shower, and go find something productive to do, because I'm not going to let you rot in my house." It was harsh, but it was what I needed to hear. So I started doing things. Small things at first. I started cooking, something I'd never done much when I was married. I discovered I was good at it, or at least that I enjoyed doing it. I started helping with Andrew's finances, organizing his papers, paying his bills online, those things, and I kept up with physical therapy religiously. After like a year from the accident, I was walking without a cane most of the time, only needed it when I was tired or when the weather was bad. Something about atmospheric pressure made my back hurt more. And then I met Courtney. This was like a year and a half after the accident. Andrew was doing electrical work at a wedding venue, one of those fancy places where rich people have receptions, and he asked me to come with him because he needed help carrying some things from the truck. I still wasn't in condition to do heavy work, but I could help with the light stuff. Courtney was the owner of the catering business working that day at the venue. She was like 35 years old, brown hair always pulled back in a ponytail, and that energy of someone who's always moving, always doing 10 things at once. We ended up talking because she needed a table. I moved to a specific place, and Andrew was busy with electrical cables, so she asked me if I could help. I explained I had physical limitations, but that I could try, and she said no problem. She just needed someone to hold one end while she pushed the other. We ended up talking during the event. She told me about her catering business. I told her vaguely about my situation. I didn't give her all the details that first day, obviously, but there was something about the conversation that felt easy, natural. We started seeing each other more often after that. Andrew worked quite a bit at that venue because the owner always had electrical problems, old building, and Courtney was also there, often for events. We became friends first, which was weird for me because I hadn't had many friends outside of work in years. She knew how to listen, and I think I needed someone who would just listen without judging. Like 6 months after meeting her, Courtney proposed a crazy idea to me. She said she wanted to expand her business beyond catering, that she wanted to do full event planning, but that she didn't have the time or logistical experience to coordinate everything. She asked me if I'd consider being her partner, that she'd handle the food and I could handle logistics, vendor coordination, those things. I told her she was crazy, that I was an unemployed construction supervisor, not an event planner. She said, event planning was basically like coordinating a construction site, but with flowers and DJs instead of cement and scaffolding. And you know what? She was right. We started the business together, 50-50. Small investment at first. I used some of the money I'd saved. Before the accident, not much, but something. Turns out I was good at this. Coordinating vendors, managing timelines, solving last-minute problems. All of that was basically the same thing I'd done in construction, but in a less dangerous and fancier environment. And Courtney, well, Courtney was brilliant with people, with clients, with making everything look beautiful and delicious. The business started growing, slow but steady. And at some point during all this, Courtney and I went from being partners and friends to something more. I can't pinpoint exactly when it happened, like it wasn't a conscious decision of, okay, now we're a couple. It just happened gradually, naturally. One day I realized that when I thought about my future, she was in it. And apparently, she felt the same way. But during all this time, during these 3 years of rebuilding my life, creating this business, starting a relationship with Courtney, there was a constant pain in my chest for my kids. Not a day. I went by that, I didn't think about them. Leah would be 15 years old by then, Gabriel 14, Harper 10. They were becoming teenagers, growing up, and I wasn't there. I didn't know what music they liked, what subjects they preferred in school, if Gabriel still played soccer, if Harper still drew. It was like having a phantom limb, something that's no longer there but still hurts all the time. And then, 4 years after Kristen took them away, I got a call that almost made me fall out of my chair. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered thinking it was a client. And I heard, "Dad?" It was Leah. My daughter Leah, who was now 16 years old and had a voice that sounded so adult I almost didn't recognize it. I started crying immediately. Couldn't help it, just asked her if she was okay. If everyone was okay, what had happened? Leah explained that she'd just gotten her own phone. Kristen had finally let her have one. And the first thing she did was look for my number in her mom's old stuff. She told me that she and her siblings wanted to see me, that they'd been asking about me for years, and Kristen always told them I didn't want anything to do with them, that I'd moved on with my life and forgotten about them. When Leah told me that, I felt like I'd been hit again, but this time worse than the fall from the scaffold. My own daughter, my own kids, had spent 4 years thinking their father didn't want them. I told her the truth, right there on the phone, crying like an idiot. I told her I'd tried to contact them every week for years, that I'd sent letters and gifts, that I never forgot them for even a second. I told her their mom never answered my calls, that she'd blocked me from everything. Leah was quiet for a moment and then said, "Seriously, Dad?" And I said, "Seriously, Mija. I swear on my life." And she started crying too. We arranged a visit for the following week. Kristen didn't know. Leah made that clear. She said her mom was working that Saturday. She worked in retail, apparently. I don't know what had happened with Shane at that point, and that they could take the bus to come see me. I sent them money for an Uber instead of the bus, because I wasn't going to let my kids take public transportation for hours to come see me. When they arrived that Saturday, I swear I almost didn't recognize them. Leah was a tall young woman, looked so much like Kristen did when I met her that it hurt a little. Gabriel was taller than me already. He was 15. All thin and gangly like teenagers are. And Harper, my baby Harper, who was 11 years old, wasn't a little girl anymore. All three hugged me at the same time at the office door. Courtney and I had a small office for the business at that point, and it was one of those moments where the whole world stops, and only that moment exists. You know? I showed them the office, introduced them to Courtney, who very smartly excused herself after greeting them to give us space, told them about the business, about how I'd rebuilt my life, and they told me about their lives too. Gabriel still played soccer, was on the school team. Harper now did digital art on the computer, not just drawings anymore. Leah was thinking about college, wanted to study something related to science, but the conversation eventually got to the inevitable. Leah asked me directly why I'd never contacted them. And there I had to decide what to do. I could soften it, could say something vague, or I could give them the complete truth. I chose the truth. I showed them my phone with all the unanswered messages, the call logs, photos of packages I'd sent with tracking numbers. I told them about the letters, everything. I watched their faces change as they processed what I was telling them. I saw the exact moment when they realized their mother had lied to them for 4 years. Gabriel turned red, like he looked like he wanted to break something. Harper started crying. Leah just stayed quiet, with that expression of someone who's reassembling their entire life in their head. They asked me about Shane, and that's when I found out what had happened. Turns out Shane had left Kristen like 6 months before, for a TikTok influencer or something, someone younger with more followers. Kristen had been left alone, working retail, trying to pay rent for a small apartment. The kids told me their mom had been different lately, like depressed, and that sometimes she talked about mistakes she'd made without elaborating. We started seeing each other regularly after that. Every weekend, sometimes more. Kristen eventually found out, obviously, but couldn't do much about it. Leah was already 16, old enough to make her own decisions about who she saw. And she brought her siblings with her. Kristen tried to forbid it at first, but the kids basically told her that if she didn't let them see me, they'd simply leave when they turned 18 and never see her again. It was harsh, but after what she'd done to them, I couldn't blame them for being angry. And then, like 3 months after reconnecting with my kids, Kristen showed up at my office on a Tuesday afternoon. Without warning, without calling first, just walked in like she had a right to be there. She looked different, older, tired, like the last few years hadn't been kind to her. She asked me to talk privately. Courtney realized immediately who she was. He'd told her everything. And let us use the office while she went to check out a venue. Kristen started with apologies, saying she'd made terrible mistakes, that she'd been selfish, that she'd been scared when I had my accident and didn't know how to handle the situation. She said Shane had been a mistake, that leaving everything had been a mistake, that walking away from me had been the biggest mistake of her life. And then came the question I should have seen coming. She wanted to know if we could try again, rebuild the family, give the kids a stable home with both their parents. I looked at her sitting there, literally begging, and felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not pain. Nothing. This woman who had been my wife for 14 years, the mother of my children, who had abandoned me at the worst moment of my life, who had taken my children from me for 4 years, now wanted to come back because her perfect life plan with the young personal trainer hadn't worked out, and I just felt nothing toward her. I told her no. I told her I'd rebuilt my life, that I had a successful business, a partner who loved and supported me, and that I'd just gotten the relationship with my kids back. I told her that what she did was unforgivable. That lying to our children about me for years, making them believe I didn't want them, was a cruelty I couldn't just forget. I told her we could co-parent civilly, that I wasn't going to prevent her from seeing the kids, but that we as a couple were over forever. She started crying, begged me to reconsider, said she was still in love with me, but I knew the truth. She wasn't in love with me. She was in love with the idea of security I represented now that Shane was gone, and she was struggling financially. If I was still at Andrew's house with no job, limping with a cane, I bet anything she never would have come looking for me. I asked her to leave. She left. And that was the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about logistics for the kids. The lawsuit against the construction company finally settled like a year and a half after reconnecting with the kids. Philip did an incredible job, proved clear negligence, showed the company had ignored multiple safety violations. I won a large settlement. I'm not going to give exact numbers, but let's say it was enough to never have to worry about money again if I was smart about it. I used part of that money to expand the business with Courtney. We bought a bigger space, hired more staff, started doing larger events, and I used another part to buy a house. A house big enough for my 3 kids to have their own rooms for when they stayed with me, which by then was increasingly frequent. And then Leah, my oldest daughter who had always been the bravest, the day she turned 17 told me she wanted to live with me permanently. Gabriel, who was 16, said the same. Harper, who was 12, did too. All 3 wanted to leave Kristen and move in with me. I told Leah we had to do it legally, that I couldn't just take them. She said she understood, that she'd do whatever was necessary. We started the legal process to change custody. And here's the crazy part. Kristen didn't fight. When she received the papers, she just signed them. Didn't even try to argue or ask for shared custody. Just signed and returned the papers. Philip said it was the first time he'd seen something like that usually there's at least some resistance. But Kristen knew she'd lost. The kids didn't want her. They were old enough for their opinions to matter in court, and she knew that if she tried to fight, all the details of what she'd done would come out officially. So that was that. Kristen went back to her hometown. Works retail, lives alone. The kids see her sometimes, mainly on holidays because Harper insists she's still their mom and deserves some contact. Leah and Gabriel are less generous, but they go to support their younger sister. I don't think Kristen and I will ever really have a cordial relationship, but we can be in the same room without it being horrible, which I guess is progress. Courtney and I got married last year. It was a small, intimate event that we organized ourselves because, obviously, that's what we do. Leah was maid of honor. Gabriel and Harper participated too. Andrew was my best man and cried during the whole ceremony, which was funny because he always acts tough. The kids love Courtney, and she loves them like they're her own. She doesn't try to replace their mother. She's smarter than that, but she's a constant and loving presence in their lives. The business keeps growing. We just hired 2 more planners and an additional chef. We do like 80 events a year now, from intimate weddings to large corporate retreats. My back still bothers me sometimes, especially when it's about to rain, and I'll probably always have some stiffness. But I walk normally. I can carry things, in moderation. And most of the time, I forget I was ever in a hospital bed thinking I'd never walk again. Leah's in college now, studying biology at a school only 2 hours from here. She comes home every couple of weeks. Gabriel's applying to universities. He'll probably study something sports-related, maybe kinesiology or athletic training. Harper's in 7th grade and is still the family artist. Her room is full of her printed digital drawings. Last week, Gabriel had an important soccer game, one of the last of his senior year of high school. He was nervous. I could tell by the way he kept checking his phone during breakfast. I told him he'd be fine, that he'd trained hard to trust himself. When we got to the field, Courtney, Harper, and I, Gabriel looked for me in the crowd, saw me, and smiled. That smile that says, "My dad is here, everything's okay." And in that moment, I thought about everything I'd lost, all the pain, all the betrayal, all the nights I spent crying for my kids. And I thought about how sometimes life destroys you completely just to give you the chance to rebuild yourself into something better. I don't know if there's some deep lesson there, honestly. But I know my kids know their dad never abandoned them, never forgot them, and was always fighting for them, and I guess that's enough.